All right, so we continue on this series, Following the Call, a 52-week series, which hopefully you're enjoying the reading on. I've got some quotes I'm going to give you today. My goal is to give you, the book itself gives you these authors' reflections, essays from a wide range of people over centuries of time and different avenues of thought. They already are distilling, and what I'm giving you is what really impacted me. So something could have impacted you differently. Please let me know during the week if that happens to you, because I'd love to include what's messing with you in this each week. Nobody's taken me up on that yet, so please somebody take me up on that, because I would love to hear how this is messing with you. So we get into this last Sunday in January, the fourth Sunday, where we've been spending all of these weeks on foundation stuff, giving you context to get us ready, kind of taking a look at the forest before we take a look at the trees. And today's the last day that we do that. And today we're talking about the idea of what it means to be blessed. We did that a little bit last week with this idea of foolish wisdom, as a chapter talked about. Today we're taking a look at what does it mean, how do we understand that word blessedness? Because Jesus starts his magnum opus here with these things called the Beatitudes, these blessing statements that don't necessarily make sense. He says, God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. God blesses those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. So all this raises a question for me. Jesus seems to be pretty adamant about this word blessed and has all these strange statements which are counterintuitive and countercultural. Makes me want to ask the question all over again. What does it mean to be blessed in our lives? Is he talking about happiness? Like maybe that's how we think about it? Are we happy? Are we having a good time? Is it creature comforts? Do we have enough stuff to keep us buoyed? Maybe our happiness comes from those creature comforts and wealth, because we can afford stuff that keeps us happy, less stressed out. I don't know. Is it inner peace that he's getting at? Is it a carefreeness about life? Is it stressless life? Is it about not having pain? Is that what blessed means? Is it anti-wealth? Is it anti-power? Is it anti-fame? What is Jesus getting at here? Some translations actually translate the word blessed as happy or happiness, even some reputable ones. There's one called the New American Standard Bible, which is academically quite sound. It uses happiness, and there's a modern translation called the Common English Bible. It uses, instead of blessed, it uses the word happy are those. And technically, if we go back to the Greek word and understanding of happy, that's probably right. James Howell writes this about the Greek understanding. For the ancients, happiness was a possession of the soul, something that one acquired and that, once acquired, could not be easily taken away. Happiness designated the supreme aim of human life. That's what we were after. Living in accord with nature, in harmony with our deepest aspirations as human beings. Almost like he's talking about living at a max level of integrity or something, and that integrity in which we're living with is deeply connected with what is integral to all of creation. It's very interesting. This is a little bit different than American happiness. He goes on, American happiness is something I pursue. Happiness is up to me. But Jesus' Beatitudes are about what we cannot achieve, what we cannot make happen, what we can only receive as the most startling of gifts So to be blessed is being swept up in God's decisive moment in the world. Wow. To be blessed is being swept up in God's decisive moment in the world. N.T. Wright, who is, if you're not familiar with him, he is one of the most prolific and most highly regarded scholars in our world today when it comes to the Christian faith and its teachings and its scriptures, sacred text. He says it's about something that's starting to happen, not about a general truth of life. It is gospel, good news, not good advice. There's something in these blessed statements that rings very true, very deeply. Richard Rohr, who's a guy I follow, he's a Franciscan friar. He's been in my ear and in front of my eyes for decades now. I read him every morning. He speaks deeply into me. He's aligned with the theology of our church. And he has a statement about truth. He says, if it's true anywhere, it's true everywhere. Jesus seems to think that his blessed statements are true. They're true. What are we missing? That's the question that's haunting me. Are we missing something? Because the way our culture thinks about things and the way that I sometimes even translate that word blessed don't look like the Beatitudes all the time. Is Jesus right? Another author, it was a longer quote, but so good, from Kathy Escobar. She says, for Jesus in the kingdom of God, somehow down means up. Much of my previous Christian experience was focused on rising up to be closer to God. Now I'm learning that downward is what draws me nearer to God. When I am with my friends in the darkness and pain, I am acutely aware of God's presence more than in my comfortable places. Downward mobility is about discovering and revealing what it means to live into the kingdom of God as a Christ follower. And just want to note, that's why we began integrating meditation in our worship services many years ago. It's because the breathing grounds us. It takes us down. It gets rid of the noise so that we can focus on what is. That's why we do it. After we'd been doing it for several months, just a quick aside, one guy came up to me and he said, my favorite part of the services is the meditation because it's the only period of silence I get in my entire week. Kathy Escobar continues, the Beatitudes inspire us toward a better way. Jesus' words of blessing to the poor, marginalized, and downwardly mobile were not a threat or a coercion technique to force us into a miserable life. He's not saying, hey, cash in everything and be poor. Go live in a tent encampment somewhere. That's not what he's saying. He's also not saying that simplistic or simple living is a great idea. Simple living is a great idea. We become less encumbered by the stuff when we learn to live more simply. So that's good, but that's not, I think, what he's really talking about. So it's not a coercive thing. It's good news, not good advice, as N.T. Wright said. His call to go downward is a methodology for the abundant life. Somehow there's a connection between learning what he's saying in the Beatitudes and this abundant life he promised. It is the easier yoke. It's an easier way to live. If we crave God's peace and presence, then I guess we have to trust his methods too, even if it doesn't always make sense. Finally, she says, it's easy to think more money, power, or status will give us security and a stronger sense of self. Yet Jesus says in Matthew 10:39, it will be exactly the opposite. To find our lives, we need to lose them. To lose them. Like, I wonder, is Jesus talking about attachment, like losing attachment? That's a very Buddhist way of thinking, which I think Jesus would have been fine with. Is that what we're talking about, or is it something different? Well, I want to talk about these things, and more importantly, I want you to think about these things. Because as I read this stuff, it made me wonder if this stuff is true. If Jesus is right somehow, how is it true for me? How has what he has said and what he espoused How has it already been true in my experience? Because I think if it's not ever true in anybody's experience, at some point we have to say, maybe it's not true. But I have a hunch that since this has stood the test of time, maybe we should pay attention to it. So, some of you are, especially if you're taking multiple things, some of you are reading the stuff for Sunday. Some of you are coming to my Tuesday Heart of Christianity class, which is pretty heavy-duty reading, right? It's pretty dense stuff. And some of you are taking Carol's Old Testament class. And I've heard through the grapevine that some of you are saying, it's just too much reading, it's too much reading. Well, let's add some more to that then. And let's give you an assignment, not reading, but writing. Because I would encourage you to do more than think, but encourage you to write, journal out, chicken scratch some stuff out. How are the Beatitudes true for you? How can you say and affirm this statement? It's going to take you a while on some of these, I think. There is blessedness even when I am poor or poor in spirit. So what I can tell you about this, I'm going to give you very brief examples. I'm not going to belabor all these things, so you don't have to worry. One of the things that always stands with me, and I will never, ever forget, just two stories. One is half a dozen times I've been to one of the worst slums in the world called Huruma. It's outside of Nairobi, Kenya. And every time I go, I'm shocked at the level of extreme poverty that we see. It's the things that you see in TV. It's an urban setting. It's not rural out in the sticks, which means there is capacity for those basic civic services like sewage and electricity and running water. But if you are extremely poor, and if you are the most poor among the extreme poor, then you're left to build a shanty out of whatever scraps you can find, a tin roof if you're lucky. You're probably going to have a dirt floor. It's going to be sticks. There's no insulation. The electricity that you may or may not have in your tiny 8x8 shack where potentially 4 to 8 people will call home, where you do all of your living and cooking and everything else in that confined space. Imagine that. During the winter months where the rains come, you want to be very careful not to touch the roof or anything else metal because your electricity is pirated. Somebody hijacked the main line and they're charging you not much, but more than you can really afford just to have that one light bulb on or your cooktop to work. It's filthy. There's sewage running in the streets. And they're trapped. And the work we were involved in was to help out the poorest of the poor orphans in that already horrible place have a shot at education. And for many years, it was a major pride point for us until some things within the parent organization got messy. One of the things that shocked me every time I visited was that in spite of, or despite, maybe both, despite the poverty that they experienced, the children and their caregivers exuded joy. It was baffling, and it stunned every one of us who went over there. Because as we're walking through this area, we're like, this is hell. If there is hell, this is it. We are walking in it right now. And the people who are giving us hospitality, their faces were filled with love and joy. It hurt my brain every day trying to hold this tension of having so little and having so much. It makes me wonder that when you are in that level of poverty, and for them it was no choice, they don't wish this, that's not their life dream, to stay in that level of poverty, of course not. But when that is what you have cannot be the focus. You are forced to look for something deeper beyond your stuff or creature comforts or your roof or your lousy couch. Have you ever experienced such a thing? We've had some folks here who have experienced that. One of our crosswalkers in the 2020 fire lost her home up by Berryessa, where she'd spent decades. And all of a sudden, she had nothing. Nothing. Lived over at the Embassy Suites for months until insurance things settled out. When you lose everything to that capacity, and of course our neighbors down in the SoCal are experiencing this by the tens of thousands. When that happens, you have a crystal clear reality of what matters, don't you? The stuff doesn't matter so much. And you find out that there is something deeper there. There is a deeper current that is even more important than your computer or your sweet big TV or your favorite recliner or even your cherished photos. You know, I experienced this once, just a taste of it. There's no way I've experienced anything that I've talked to you about, from the fires or certainly not the extreme poverty, hardly. I grew up in a middle-class house. I've never needed for really anything I needed, you know. But there was one time where I kind of had a perfect storm in my life. It was just when both my kids were in high school. They were deeply involved in the band program there. They were band nerds and were all in on that, and that was their sport, you know. And what's true of sports is also true for music. It's cost a lot of money. And you've got to buy instruments, you've got to buy uniforms, and there was a spring break trip that was going to come up. This was like around Christmas time. And so we had to have the money in for all these different things all at once. And we were like 4 days away from when I was going to get my next paycheck. And not only were all these things, you know, piling up for our kids' costs. Kids are expensive, aren't they? Why do we have kids anyway? They're very expensive. They continue to eat, they grow, they need clothes and stuff. Why do we do it? But anyway, hope they're watching. So anyway, we had all these expenses. Then we had all these other expenses that we didn't quite expect, and then Christmas expenses and all that. Anyway, it was like one of these weeks where I know I'm going to be all right. We're going to be fine, but I knew I was looking at just a few days until payday, and I was like, I got nothing, man. We got nothing. And it was one of these days filled with great stress. You know, like, how are we going to make it? Worrying about every penny, you know. How are we going to make it just 3 days? And it'll all be just fine. And then some crazy thing happened. I shifted from realizing that I had absolutely no power over my reality at that moment. There was nothing I could do. My stress and anxiety literally turned into laughing out loud. Because I was powerless and I knew I could do nothing. And so I started to focus on what was. And that what was much more important than the 3 days of stress. And it was only 3 days. And we were just fine. But sometimes we need to get kicked in the gut. Sometimes we need a wake-up call to help us recognize that our stuff really isn't what it's all about and really isn't where our security lies. There's something about poverty that allows us to do that. You're not being asked to become poor, but you are asked by Jesus, if this is true, to learn a lesson from those who don't have a choice. Learn to understand how is it that they found perhaps even greater joy than most of us know, even in their extreme poverty. Because I've seen it, and it's true. This other thing, when I'm in mourning, well, that's an interesting one. That's like the last thing you think about in terms of blessedness. This past Tuesday, when I was hosting my 12 and 7 o'clock class for Heart of Christianity, most of the people were kind of worked up over current events in the United States and frustrated and anxious about what executive orders were going to mean for different things and different people and all that stuff, and how do we deal with this tension? All of them. It was palpable in the room, except for one. One person between both groups did not feel the stress of the political moment. And that was Candace Ramsey. Candace gave me permission to share this story. And if you were in my 7 o'clock class, she shared this. I think it was the 7 o'clock. Where she said, you know what, I didn't turn on the news. I didn't pay any attention to what was going on in Washington early this week. because it's the anniversary of my mother's death. And in remembering this tremendous loss in her life, everything that actually matters came into much greater focus. You ever been there? Where when you lose something, lose someone, it's like all the noise and nonsense that might otherwise distract us, they just don't compare. Sometimes we're reminded in the reversal, in our mourning and in our grief, even in our mourning and in our grief, it sometimes gives us greater clarity to see things for what they are and aren't, and what we really truly need. I remember during one of the fires, I think it was a 2017 fire, when our campus was full of evacuees. Maybe it was 2020, I don't know. But I remember we were in the fireside room because we couldn't be in here because the cots were set up for all the evacuees, you know? And I remember one of the things that we were saying to and with each other was, we see more clearly with smoke in our eyes. Sometimes we see more clearly when we're mourning. Sometimes it's when we're humble. Because when we're humble, Jesus had the audacity to say we inherit the whole earth. How in the world is that possible? Well, we had a crosswalker. He had theological differences with us, and so he doesn't come around here much anymore, but he was a deep, regular part of our congregation. And he and I'd have conversations now and again. He was houseless by choice. He could last in a room somewhere, but not for very long. Wasn't gonna fit his life at all. And as far as I know, he's still camping somewhere around Napa. And we would talk about his life, and I would want to get inside his head. What's going on here? And he echoed something that I think is a truism that Jesus is getting at, which is that when we are humble enough to realize that we are not our houses and our creature comforts, we inherit the whole earth in the sense that it's what we have. It's like we are more connected to this place that we are a part of called earth than when we are not so humble. When we're built up on our own ego and our stuff, we lose sight of what's already ours. How many of you walk for exercise, by the way? How many of you saunter? Two things, isn't it? It's possible that I can do my normal daily walk and completely miss the majesty of creation as I walk right past it. You don't need much. A blade of grass will do. I challenge you. The next time you're out for a hike or a walk, saunter. Slow down. See the majesty of what is all around you. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you live in Northern California. Has anybody told you that? Northern California is a gem. We are so blessed to live in such an abundant space of extraordinary beauty and majesty. Don't let it be lost on you. Be humble. Appreciate all of it around you. It's yours. You're connected to it. Nobody can take the vision of the trees that you walk by, or the majesty of the ants crawling along, or the hummingbirds feeding on whatever they're feeding on. It's yours. Embrace it. How about seeking and working for justice? This is an easy one. I believe the Spirit of God is always at work, already there. When we choose to stand up and with and for those people who are experiencing injustice, when we do that, we find out God is already present. There is a palpable thing that connects us in that space. Just try it. When we're merciful, by the way, new hero on asking for mercifulness is the Right Reverend Marianne Edgar Boudet, I think, or Booty? Yeah, pretty awesome. She had a very, I think, shalomy request. She was more shalomy than I was this week, I think, in her just asking the President of the United States, who is sitting, right there and quite directly, to be merciful. To be merciful. As he himself had recognized he had received mercy from God and not being shot, she was asking that he be merciful, as our scriptures call us to be, toward those who are fearing for their lives, for those who are refugees, for those who are undocumented, and for those anywhere in the neighborhood, including LGBTQ+. We all, when we are in touch with who we are all very good, especially when we're blamed for something, we're very good at recognizing our own humanity and giving ourselves grace at times for that. How well do we extend that grace to other people? Blessed are the merciful. Be merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Well, that's kind of obvious. The more dialed into the presence of God, of course, you're going to be enamored with that. That just makes sense. When you seek and work for peace, that's like justice. God is always about that. Shalom is God's thing. That is if you want a definition of salvation, it's shalom. It's always going to be shalom. It's never not going to be shalom. Shalom is God. You could go that far. If one of the gospel writers says God is love, then God certainly has to be shalom because love is a part of shalom. You want to get closer to that, get closer to shalom, follow it, even when you're persecuted for it. Crosswalk has experienced this as an organization for standing up for what we think is shalomi. When we took a stand, and it was a stand for LGBTQ inclusion and affirming that, just that we're all human beings and needed to be treated humanely, we got major backlash. It was not a fun chapter to be in. But am I glad we did it? I'm really glad we did it. I'm really glad we did it. Yeah. That's our jam, right? Not the issue, but the shalom that leads to speaking into these things. And when we do, yeah, it's not fun, but Crosswalk, are we blessed? Are we blessed? I mean, come on. This church, this is ridiculous. That's not a church growth strategy, what we did. That's a church shrink strategy, what we did. That's a church killer strategy that we did. And yet we have celebrated one of our strongest years. 2024 in many ways was one of our strongest years in many decades, in my time here at least, in terms of our outreach to the community, one of our strongest years. Even though we made the tough decision to stand up for shalom, our impact on the community has only increased. It's crazy. That's a God thing. God is with us in this, and so we shall remain. We will remain undaunted when it comes to shalom. So my question is for you. I've kind of given some examples of me and some others. These things are counterintuitive and countercultural, and yet they speak deep truth that Jesus was getting at. How are these things true for you? Because if they're true somewhere, they got to be true everywhere. So I want to pray with you, and then we'll have one last benediction, and then we're out of here. So if you would, join me in prayer. Spirit of God, Spirit that was, according to our Jewish myth, hovering over the waters of chaos before all creation began. Before that big bang, there was the Spirit at work, at play, and still is. That Spirit that has given life to everything, that Spirit that has given life to us, you, Spirit of God, what we call God. We need your help. We need your reminders. Help us understand in our culture that forces us to think in terms of being consumers and being radically independent and strong and powerful and famous. Remind us by your gentle whisper. Blow into our sails winds that will carry us to a different perspective, that are counterintuitive, countercultural, but deeply and profoundly true. Providing us a happiness in the Greek sense of the word, not a fleeting thing, but something deep that will reside within us and ground us, even if we go through hell. The blessing, the joy, the happiness, the integrity with things that are integral remains. May we be tied to that foundation. May we build our lives on the shalom that continues to breathe life into all of creation and beyond. May we be found to be a people, to the best of their ability, warts and all, we did what we could to answer the call and the invitation that shalom offered. I ask this in the name of Jesus, who we follow. And finally, this benediction. May you find yourself impelled by love to join in the everlasting song that ushers in exquisite, elegant harmony, beauty, and healing for all. Thanks for coming today. Hope you had a good experience. We will see you next week. And go Kansas City Chiefs! Woohoo!